going to start off on the agenda by asking if there are any apologies. I know there are apologies from Councillor Fiona Baker, who sadly has a family member with a positive COVID test, so has chosen to stay away this evening. Do we have any other apologies? I think we're probably all present otherwise, aren't we? Can I ask if any Cabinet member has any declaration of interest for an item on the agenda? Okay, all clear. In which case we'll go to the minutes, and this is the minutes of our previous meeting, which was 21st of December. And ask the Cabinet if they have any alterations or corrections that they feel are necessary, or? Thank you, Phil. Are they agreed? Yep, thank you very much. Which then takes us, I have no chairs announcements. I've not been made aware of any urgent business. So we'll therefore move to item 6. This is the outcome of the call-in of the Cabinet decision on the 9th of November about harmonisation of garden waste services. First call-in we've had back to Cabinet. So proposing, Phil is going to very briefly summarise some of the details. We've got speakers listed, which by the way are in the following order. We've Councillor McCord, Councillor Beardsworth, Councillor Harris, and then Councillor Meredith. Once we've had speakers, we were glad to welcome Councillor Bainbridge, Chair of the Scrutiny Committee, who will then present the scrutiny's formal representation back to us, and then open it up for Cabinet debate, if everybody's happy with that. So Phil, just a few comments, perhaps just to open this up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The report is in front of you. It's in my name, and it's very factual. It talks about the fact that we made a decision on the 9th of November. That is detailed in section 2 of the report, and which also goes on to say that the decision was called in on the 16th of November and details the call-in. And as a result of that, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee met on the 14th of December to consider the call-in, and this report confirms the outcome of the hearing. Can I just say there's a typo at paragraph 2.4, where it says after all the evidence had been heard, it should be had been heard. So just draw attention to that before anybody else does. The recommendation is that we give this matter consideration. I and the Assistant Director attended Cabinet, attended the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. We made a comprehensive presentation with regard to the charging. That has been issued as an appendix now to this report that's before you. And as you can see, we had detailed discussions on the financial position nationally, locally, etc. We talked about DEFRA, the DEFRA situation, because there was issues about DEFRA imposing the fact that we've got to have a free charge or a lower charge or whatever. We talked about the option for harmonising at £30. DEFRA consultancy we talked about. That's all detailed on the slides. We talked about alternatives for residents, home composting, waste recycling centres and sharing bins. Again, that was all there. We talked about Christmas tree collections and confirmed that Christmas trees will still be collected irrespective of whether anybody signs up for the green waste collection. And we looked at the issue of opening household waste recycling centres for 7 days a week. There's a slide dealing with that. Direct debit and instalments and discounted payment options. Yes, I accept that this is an issue, and I'm sure we'll discuss that later. But we do have problems with the technology at the moment to actually offer discounts and undertake comprehensive direct payments, direct debit payments across West Northamptonshire. This is being addressed, and by the end of the next year, we will be in a position to operate direct debits throughout. And similarly, that will give us the opportunity to look at discount payments, and I'm committed to looking at those and bringing those forward for future years. So that was the presentation that we gave. As you can see, as I just said earlier, scrutiny upheld the call in, and it's now for us to consider that going forward. That's all I'll say for now.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Let's move to our speakers. Order in which they're registered. First of all is Councillor McCord. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Firstly, I want to thank all those who took part in the call-in, to all the members from all parties and none, Labour, Liberal Democrat, Conservative and Independent, all gave their support, and thank you for that. The debate that Councillor Bambridge chaired was council at its best, thoughtful, informative and challenging. And I'm grateful to Dermot for his chairmanship and to Fiona Unit and her team for attending to put the officer viewpoint. Finally, can I thank the portfolio holder, Councillor Larratt, for his time, even if at times many of his answers were more defending a position than giving reasoned responses. It was clear from the committee supported a lower charge than the £42 proposed. There was a lot of concern for charging the full amount to those in receipt of local council tax reduction scheme. And I've also made my own inquiries, and there appears to be no good reason why the council tax information cannot be used to cross-reference if a discount should be applied. Some of the half-hearted excuses don't pass any real scrutiny. And all these points need to be thought about by Cabinet, who now stand isolated from a broad spectrum of opinion within the council across all political persuasions. Cabinet has a choice to charge residents for a service that should be a core council service, not for any financial or service reason, but simply because it can. A desire to pick the pockets of the residents for £3 million. But things have moved on since the call-in. Whilst Councillor Larratt made great play at the committee meeting that the revenue was in the draft budget and cuts would be required, even at times attempting to rewrite the budget should the revenue not appear, these arguments have fallen away with the news that the council is almost £4 million more than the draft budget assumed. Green waste charges will raise £3 million in revenue. The budget has almost £4 million of windfall income not in the draft budget. Green waste charges can be zero for all residents, every part of this district, and the council would still have £1 million and change. If Cabinet insists to make this charge, they are doing so because they want to stiff the residents for £42 a year just because they can. There is no financial reason. All services proposed can be left intact. No new services will be provided. The coffers will grow by another £4 million. The cost of living is rising. Fuel, heating, gas, electricity costs are rising, as are the general increase in council tax. It is time to give residents a break. For many in the district, the weekly waste collection is their only contact with the council, along with their contact with potholes. It should be a core inclusive council service, not treated as a discretionary extra. Green waste charges should go. Cabinet now must remove these charges and harmonise at zero for all. The books are balanced. There's 170 million in the bank, and this additional 4 million is not needed. There is no need to do what you do elsewhere. Do the right thing, remove the charges, give residents a break, and bin the bin charges. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ian. Our next speaker registered is Councillor Bidsworth. Sally, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year to you all. Let's see if we can make it a nice Happy New Year for the residents of Northampton, West Northants. I totally agree and thank everybody who took part on the night It was a well thought out meeting. It took a long time to decide. And I think some of the actual in 2.4, some of the proposals are quite sensible to allow a lower cost or a nil cost overall, to wait for DEFRA's consultation, to clarify Christmas tree collection goes ahead, and all the other bits. But the last two, I think, is very important, to propose a scheme to allow payment by instalments. Now, you might not think a lot of money to us. It's not a lot of money. 30, 40 pounds is a lot, but somebody on low income, it's an awful lot of money. And there's no reason why we can't send a bill out the same as the council, same time as the council tax, with instalments payments that can come in with the council tax and then just separated. It's no big deal. I'm sure people can do it with technology as it is. And people who are on a reduction scheme, you know, they shouldn't be charged at all. I think this is very true what Councillor McCord said. It was cross-party. It was a very well managed meeting. People had their opinion. It didn't get heated. It was people putting forward suggestions that'll make something better for the residents of West Northants. And I think even though I can see why you want to charge the money to get extra income, I don't think it's necessary. People have got bills today. They're talking about 30, 40% increase in electricity and gas, 2.9 on the council tax, national insurance going up, food prices, you know yourselves if you shop, it's going up. And people, I notice it in the shops, it's not going up 10p's, it's going up 50p for things. And it's a lot of money, and people are on such low incomes. We've got 1.5 million children in this country in poverty, living in acute poverty. It's been reported today by the Jones Roundtree Foundation. I think we need to be absolutely sure that we're not bringing more misery down on the people of this county. And I think we need to reflect that. Plus the fact, if you don't listen to scrutiny, what's the point of it? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Say again? Has anybody got any questions for Councillor Beardsworth? No, thank you. Thank you. That's good. Jonathan, Councillor Harris next. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, councillors. I won't try and sound like a broken record, but I would echo many of the points that have already been made, and was obviously part of the calling process itself and attended the scrutiny committee meeting. For one point, from my perspective of clarity, the principle of harmonisation is clearly something which I don't disagree with and argue with. It is patently wrong where we would have a situation of certain parts of the old legacy council paying different rates for different services. So that point I don't disagree with. I think the fundamental question is around those options that are available for the cabinet to make decisions on. I think definitely the notion of at least a reduction in fee should be considered as set out before you. I wouldn't necessarily go entirely for a complete removal because I appreciate the funding situation for the council, but nonetheless, it should either be no fee at all for all or a reduced fee for all is the principle that I take. My particular concern is that obviously the income that's going to be generated from a charge, should it be put in place, is going to be used to, as far as I understand it, to supplement roles potentially within other parts of the place team. My own perspective on that is if this cabinet decides that it is going to go ahead, and I would urge that it doesn't go ahead with the decision, the budget is extremely light in regards to climate and environmental matters. And I would be arguing that if the charge is a decision that this cabinet makes to take forward, then it should be utilised for that as an initiative to move towards the carbon net zero situation. But fundamentally, I was in support of the call-in, and I do think the cabinet really needs to rethink its decision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Final speaker is Councillor Meredith. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to wish everybody in this room a happy new year and perhaps a prosperous new year. I put my name to the call-in because I believe there should be a reduction in the green waste collection. One of the main things that I am concerned about is that the tip to Great Billing is only open 5 days a week, and it's the other 2 days a week is closed. Most of us know here how the problem of what we're all facing. We're all facing a massive problem which is escalating out of control, which is the fly tipping, particularly in the area which I represent. I have seen an upsurge in fly tipping. All sorts of material are fly tipped, and it's quite worrying. It's quite worrying for everybody. People don't want to come out their front doors and see the fly tipping. I've read in the report that if we open up the tips, it's going to cost the council £950,000 per year. But I believe that we ought to find out certain questions that need to be asked. And one of the questions I'm concerned about is, do the council, when they pick up the fly tipping, and I noticed the lorries which come round to the eastern side have to be emptied at least 3 times a day. They get full up, completely full with fly tipping. That's just on the area in Talavera. And how much do the councils have to pay for getting rid of the fly tipping, which is dumped? If there is a charge to that, and if we can control fly tipping, and I believe by closing the tip 2 days, people have now got to the impression that the tip is closed, and they don't seem to know, although they get leaflets around to say when the tip is closed, they don't. They get confused when the tip is open. And it is an easy thing for them to do, to go out and fly tip rubbish. And the other day, I was in my allotment. I was only in there for 15 minutes. I come outside and there was a lorry load of fly tipped material. So I think that's an important question. And also, I do take the point of what Councillor Beers was made. I noticed there is a lot of people now struggling through financial pressures on them. A lot of people are now living below the poverty line. And some people want to have that service by having their green waste bin emptied. And I think it's rather sad that the high figure. I mean, we must make some money off of the green waste which is composted. And perhaps as a council, we should make sure that we're selling this completed compost stuff to people who can afford to buy it. These are some of the questions I need to be asked. And I urge you most deeply that we have to control this fly tipping.
Yeah.
The residents.
Just if I may, as we've gone a minute or two over, so may I just ask you one quick final comment,
I'm just
please?
going to finish now. I'll just finish now. Anyway, I've made my main points, Jonathan, and I know that this cabinet is a listening cabinet. You've taken things on board, and I know and I appreciate that. So I hope you hear what I am to say. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you very much for your comments, and to all our speakers. Let's now invite Councillor Banbridge, Dermot, sort of formally give the response, if you like, on the behalf of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. At the Place and Overview Scrutiny Committee meeting on December the 14th, the call in for the charging for green bin collection was accepted. Having heard submissions from Councillor McCord, who originated the call in along with Councillors Beersworth, Stone, Harris and Roberts, who were also call-in originators, and this followed a robust and harmonious discussion. The following relevant points were discussed: the basic need for a charge to be made for the service, the need for harmonisation across the former council areas, the likely take-up if the proposed charges are imposed, the alternatives for not paying, both for those who can't afford it and for those not prepared to pay it. And these alternatives included home composting, but composters to be provided at a favourable price was obviously part of the offer. The use of recycling centres, garden waste being put in residual bins, resulting in costs and environmental detriment, and fly tipping with the problems and costs that that creates. The financial side was also considered, in particular, the reasons for creating a surplus above and beyond the basic costs of the green waste collection service. While South Northants residents have previously had the green bin service included in their waste collection service at no extra charge, both Daventry and Northampton residents have paid. Northampton already charging residents £42 and Daventry 35, albeit for a 10 monthly service, as a couple of the winter months are left out because of the drop in gardening activity. But there appeared to be no support from any of the committee members for charging £42 per annum from the service, but generally the principle of charging was accepted. As you know, and that's why we're here tonight, the meeting was resolved, the call-in be accepted, and the following alternative courses of action being considered: to allow for a lower cost than the £42 proposed, whilst being cost neutral; to await the outcome of the DEFRA consultation before placing reliance on the income stream proposed; to clarify Christmas tree collection service, which has since been done; to open household waste recycling centres 7 days a week; to amend any proposed scheme to allow payment by instalments; and to amend any proposed scheme to allow those in receipt of local council tax reduction scheme to have a lower or nil cost. I had hoped that at that meeting, the committee could have discussed preferred options, but this, I was informed, was not part of our remit. However, my feelings from the discussions that evening were that, as I said before, the majority present accepted that harmonisation was necessary at this time. There were strong misgivings about charging residents a sum above and beyond that for delivering the service. And there was no clarity given as to exactly what the charge would be for the service if it were to be cost neutral. The sum of just over £30 if charged to all West Northants residents had been talked about as being cost neutral. However, the committee was informed that a £30 charge would result in a budget deficit of £1 million, but the exact charge for the cost neutral service was not stated. It's also interesting to note that the Cabinet report states that the £35 charge for the 10-month Daventry service would be £42 if it was increased to a 12-month service. However, there's no reference to any dissatisfaction from Daventry residents on the service they receive, which presumably is not necessary in the deep winter months. So perhaps there's another alternative that should be discussed, which would be financially beneficial to residents, and that is the 10-month service introduced over the whole of West Northants. This would lower the overall charge proposed, and at the same time it would reduce vehicle use and the resulting emissions. However, there's another element which has either changed or was incorrectly presented at the call-in meeting. At that meeting, assurances were given that the service level would not be reduced and that charities and places of worship would still receive a free service. Councillor Guildford, who's my vice chair on the committee, has since been informed that this is not the case. I believe that had the committee known this was the case, support for the inclusion for a free service to those organisations would have been strong. I further suggest that in your discussions tonight, this should be a serious consideration, despite the fact that there are, of course, cost implications for doing that. As a member for Silverstone Ward, which I believe is the most rural in not only South Northants, but also the whole of the West Northants area, and having arguably the largest proportion of residents with gardens and potentially the largest number of customers for the service who can benefit from it. I've received many communications challenging the proposal, both from individual residents and parish councils, and I know fellow councillors have had the same. The green bin service is highly respected by the residents, but cost is very relevant. And as we've heard from the other speakers, for a lot of people, it's an essential service. While many people would rather not pay for it at all, generally the principle of paying seems to be accepted, but going from £0 to £42 for something that's been enjoyed for nothing for years is felt as a step too far. While the predicted take-up percentages in the original Cabinet report may or may not be correct, I'm convinced that residents would accept a charge that demonstrably covers only the cost of the service, but out of principle are very unlikely to accept a higher charge and may therefore seek to dispose of their garden waste in a manner that is potentially more costly to the council and the environment. My final point was brought up by members at the call-in meeting. It relates to older and infirm residents as well as those on low incomes. It seems a bit taken for granted that if someone has a garden, they can afford to pay for a green bin. If they don't want to pay, they can take their tip to the car, their car to the tip, sorry. This is true in many cases, but there are also many people with gardens who need the service but can't afford it or don't have the resources or ability to use a tip. Please think of them in the context of keeping the charge as low as possible to encourage as many residents to use it as possible, and hopefully a successful campaign based on value for money will encourage more take-up than expected and therefore more income. I hope these thoughts might be helpful to your deliberations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Dermot, for expressing those so clearly. Probably ought to just check. Does anybody have any queries they want to raise with Adam? Thank you.
Dermot, just to clarify, the recommendation coming forward from scrutiny is that we consider a cost neutral charge, so a charge whereby the council covers its costs. Is that correct?
Well, the actual wording is to allow a lower cost than the £42 proposed while being cost neutral. That's the outcome from the call-in.
So
the general feeling of the meeting was, I believe, that it should be on a cost only basis.
So, i.e. to cover the cost that the council incurs through the collection.
Yeah.
So the renewed demands now for a zero charge is actually a contradiction of the recommendations coming forward from scrutiny. Is that correct?
I didn't make that suggestion.
No, but others have.
There was no particular, the outcome of the call-in did not talk about a zero. I mean, it's one that obviously could be considered, but
that's not the recommendation.
No, not as such.
Okay, thank you.
It's a possibility as part of the wording, but it's not specifically stated as such.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Dermot. Mike, you wanted to ask a question?
Just a really quick comment rather than a question. You said about the 3742 thing with the Daventry issue. I looked into this as well, and actually all of these things were discussed back in January 2020, and a policy was produced by the Shadow. So that's when that approach was formalised, was actually January 2020. So it's actually the principle of this, if you like, was agreed by the Shadow as opposed to this current Cabinet. Just thought I'd make that clarification.
Thank you, Mike. That's helpful. Was there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, Councillor Hallam is right. It was approved as the Shadow Council by the Shadow Cabinet. So yeah, to reiterate that. Can I thank Dermot for his report, and can I thank the work of the Scrutiny Committee for the work that they have done on this. It was a very interesting debate, and I welcome the comments that came forward. I do think that whatever charging regime we end up with, we need to ensure that there is a system whereby people can pay by instalments, and that there is also a reduction scheme going forward. Now, I think we made it very clear that there isn't the technology in the authority at the moment to do that, although there will be by the end of the coming year. So whatever we decide tonight, I would like to see it conditional on the fact that for future years, there be payments by instalments and direct debit, and that there be an appropriate reduction scheme for those appropriate for those in need. I'm not saying that's necessarily the local council tax reduction scheme, but there needs to be some sort of reduction scheme to enable the most needy to participate in the service. So I do most wholeheartedly agree with that. Although it's not possible to do it for this year, it will definitely or should happen or must happen for future years. On the issue of the household waste recycling centres, they aren't open 7 days a week. Each one is open 5 days a week. And with regard to Northampton, as Councillor Meredith mentioned, billing is shut 2 days a week, but the 2 days that one is shut, the other one is open. So Northampton is very lucky in that it does have a household waste recycling centre. I just wanted to clarify that for Dennis's benefit. Yes, it would be lovely to reopen them, but we're talking just short of £1 million to reopen them. Whereas we have tailored the opening hours, and the opening hours that we've now got suit the are there for when the need is required. The cycling centres are shut only on the basis of the days where they're not heavily used, and we've done a lot of research into as and when that is. So what we've got is household waste recycling centres open 5 days a week. They're all open at weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, but they are closed 2 days a week, but on the basis of on the days that they're least used. So we've done a lot of work on that, and I don't really think that we should consider that. I was surprised that the scrutiny committee asked to clarify if the Christmas tree collection service is open to all residents. The slide that Fiona and I presented made it absolutely 100% clear that that was the case. We stated that, so I failed to understand, with all due respect, why the committee upheld that point of the call-in. And it's actually happening now across West Northamptonshire, that all Christmas trees are being collected, irrespective of whether people are pay into the recycling scheme or not, the brown bin scheme or not. So I was just surprised that they upheld that when we clearly clarified that that would be the case. But sorry, Dermot, do you want to?
Can I respond on that one, Chair? Basically, it was, as such, but it was to question as whether that would carry on under the new scheme. It was unclear. It was clear that for this Christmas, but I think the members were not certain about whether it covered for the coming years, which is obviously significant.
Yeah, I'm sorry if the slide didn't make it clear. It was clear enough to me. Christmas tree collections, real Christmas tree collections will continue. All West Northamptonshire Council's residents will be able to use the Christmas tree recycling service. So, sorry, I thought we made that perfectly clear, and that's what made me think that I wonder why they've accepted that aspect of the calling. But sorry, perhaps it's me being confused, but I thought we were explicit in what we said on that one. The next point I wanted to raise is the issue about awaiting the outcome of the DEFRA consultation before placing reliance on an income stream proposed. How long do you wait? DEFRA opened this consultation a long time ago. Well, how long ago was it, Stuart? Sorry. About 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they've been consulting on this, and we've been promised an outcome, and it goes on, and it goes on. I think the government have a big problem, because if they are to turn around and say we've got to have a service at a fixed figure, say £25 a year, something like that, they then have to make up the cost to local authorities who are charging. It's the new burdens guidance that government has published. So any cost of changes to local authorities will have to be met by government. And as I understand it, that works out to about £3 billion, was it, Stuart? 2.4. Sorry, 2.4 billion pounds it would cost government to reduce the cost and across the country. So I don't think personally we're going to hear much from government on this one. I don't think they've got 2.4 million pounds available, and I think they will defer it and defer it and defer it, and I don't think it will go very far. And I think to wait for it is totally unnecessary and not really something we should do. I think government and the LGA in particular, Chairman, if I can just refer to the LGA position on universal free garden waste or whatever. The LGA wants to work with government to minimise garden waste sent to landfill, but warns that the rollout of free garden waste, as some people are proposing, is not the answer. Analysis by the LGA that shows free garden waste, if that was to be introduced, I'm not saying that's what we're talking about here, but this is just an example, that would require 600 extra HGV vehicles on the road at a time when drivers, there's a shortage of drivers, and the cost to local taxpayer more than £500 million every year. And you've got the issue of fossil fuels, refuse trucks, etc. And the LGA's view is that individual councils with their residents should be allowed to decide how to carry out waste collections locally, and whether the costs of providing additional green waste collection should be met by the taxpayer or those who use the service. It also says it's unfair on households without a garden, for example, residents in properties that have no gardens, flats, etc., or live in new estates where they've got a postage stamp of a garden that's probably paved, a bit of a yard. Why they should pay at all towards a service that they can't use or never will use. As let's not remember, garden waste collection is not a statutory service, it's a service we provide. Therefore, should we be imposing the cost of that on people who are never going to use it and never have the need to use it? So there's all sorts of different reasons why the LGA feel that we should carry on roughly as we are. And I think with the LGA backing that position, I think DEFRA will not proceed to introduce a lower cost or a free service. So that's my view on that. So I don't think we should await the outcome of the DEFRA consultation, and that we should carry on with charging. As to the amount, which is the last point I wish to raise and discuss, and I'll leave it to Cabinet members to express their views as well. And the scrutiny recommendation is to consider a lower cost than £42, whilst being cost neutral overall. I don't fully understand cost neutral overall. Does that include the cost that we incur in processing each ton of green waste through the cleansing process to make it fit for end use? Does it include just what does that, what do we include to make it cost neutral? So I'm not totally convinced that that's really an option. But I personally, and I'll let Cabinet discuss it as well, we've talked about the budget, and I'm sure Malcolm will mention where we are on that and the 3.8 million, which perhaps isn't as clearly available as some people seem to think it is. But my suggestion and recommendation would be to leave the charge as proposed at £42 It's the charge that has been paid by Northampton residents for 2 years. It's equivalent to the 3 years charge of Daventry residents. And although it was equalised last year and brought into line because it was only a 10-month service. We can look at other things going forward if people want to reduce it to a 10-month service, but I can't see that being a great cost saver, because what do you do with the staff and the people who work on that? If they're all on fixed term contracts, then that wouldn't be a problem, but I'm sure they're not on fixed term contracts. Do we lay them off for 2 months? Do we get rid of them for 2 months? I think there's big personnel issues there as to how we deal with it. So can be looked at, and I'm quite prepared to look at it going forward, Chair, but my recommendation is that we stick with £42 going forward. The reinvestment that is taking place in waste and recycling, we're very short of contract managers and people to oversee the management of our contracts, and we have allowed in the budget significant funding for that. We are improving the standard of street sweeping in South Northamptonshire by taking on, buying a new vehicle and having a new road sweeping vehicle to add to the facility that already exists, which isn't much, I must admit, but at least it's a step in the right direction. So we are reinvesting in service, and we will continue to do so. You know, we have to look at the budget as a whole. We've put a lot of things in there that we want to restore, highways services, HS2 marshals, things like that, that we really desperately need. And I think that we need the income, unfortunately, and I would suggest that, as I say, my recommendation would be to leave it at £42. So I don't know if Malcolm wants to say anything on the budget position or where we are on that.
Malcolm, do you want to chip in at that point?
Can do, Chair. So do you want me to comment?
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think a couple of things. I'd say that you're quite right. It was approved by the Shadow Cabinet. And in fact, I was on the committee with 1 or 2 others in the room here that actually did approve that at the time. There is no choice about harmonisation. That's mandated on us. We got no choice about that. We didn't have it then, and we debated that at the time. So the question is not a question of whether we harmonise or not. It's a question of what we harmonise at. So it comes down to the question, Dermot, that you said. We're still very much a new council. We're still finding a way on the budget a bit. We're looking in reasonably good shape this year. But the 3.8 that I think was referred to, that was a windfall. We didn't expect to receive that, and we're very pleased to do so. And we're all sort of delighted. Well, right, okay, 3.8. What are we going to do with that? And that was last week. This week, and this is a subject that's going to be quite hot discussion at our cabinet meetings, not the public ones. We had pressures coming through from pretty much every department of in excess of 6 million. So the 3.8, we thought we were doing well on, all of a sudden, we're now in a situation whereby we've got pressure on the in excess of 6. Now, whether it'll end up as being that or not, I suspect probably not. And there'll be lots of discussions and arguments about that shape that. The point being is that we're a new cabinet, we're a new council, and unknowns do happen, and they are happening. So with a purely financial view, I wouldn't want to change it. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. Lizzie, you were indicating to speak earlier, I think.
Actually, I think it's been answered, so it's already been said, so I won't go any further.
Okay, thank you. In which case, Adam, you were going to come in and comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as a Bug Book ward member, this is a thorny issue in my patch. I've been doing the rounds of parish councils recently with differing opinions across the area. Certainly what has gone down very well is the £10 subsidised cost of a home composter, and also the concessions that we've made to allow people to share bins to reduce the cost, and those extra initiatives that we've put in place. I think looking back at policies passed by the shadow authority, I think the path that we were destined to head down was fairly clear. Looking back with hindsight, we passed a paper dated January 21, which stated that charging for garden waste is well established and is necessary in the current way to maintain the council's current financial position. When the shadow authority passed this current year's budget, it harmonised the charge for second bins in South Northampton, not the first, but the second bin, to the £42 being charged in the borough. I know full well because I received an email of complaint from a resident in Bugbrook, so I was wholly aware of that particular issue. And so, we are given the recommendation of scrutiny and the feedback from Councillor Bambridge in the fact that there was a consensus that a charge needed to apply. We are sat here to an extent quibbling over the price, and we still have to be ultra cautious in foregoing revenue where we may reach the stage where we look back and regret it. I think several of us sat around this table remember full well and bear the scars of our times at the county council, where for ideological reasons they pursued a policy of foregoing revenue for little more than populism. And I really do not want to be sat here in 2-3 years' time, whenever it may be, looking at a financial position as dark as the one that the county council faced because we made the wrong choices for an easy win at the ballot box. It isn't an easy thing to stomach for residents in my ward. Several family members of mine will have to face that. But the financial picture is clear. And the principle of charging for garden waste, I feel, was accepted by the shadow authority, and we're merely continuing in that vein.
Thank you, Adam. I agree with all your comments.
Can I just say, Chairman, my apologies. I didn't cover in detail what options there were, and Adam is quite right to mention the fact that we're happy to subsidise a home composting solution for any resident who wants to go down that route, rather than pay for the green bin charge, and that is a £10 charge that we are heavily subsidising actually. So that is another option. And of course, as has been said, elderly people living next door to each other or down the street from each other, there is the option to share bins. So it's not as if there isn't anything, but as I say, when we come around to recommendations, there will be more next year.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. Thank you for your comments, Adam. Any further comments on this at all? Also thank the Scrutiny Committee and Dermot for coming along and presenting their views today. So we have, in line with the recommendations, we have been formally notified of
there
police.
aren't any clear recommendations.
No.
So if I may, Chair,
I was going to ask to hand back to you to make a proposal, Phil.
That first of all, we thank the Scrutiny Committee for the work that they've done on this and appreciate their input. However, we consider that, considering the current financial position, that we need to continue to move ahead with charging, and I think it's generally accepted there's got to be an equal charge across West Northamptonshire, and that we set that at £42. That we don't consider waiting the outcome of DEFRA consultation, because that's been going on for ages, and whatever the outcome, the government will have to recompense us anyway. So I don't see that that should be accepted. That we recognise that Christmas trees, and confirm that Christmas trees will be collected going forward from every resident, whether they are part of the whether they pay for their bin or not, and similarly that we leave household waste recycling centres as they are at the moment. That's another recommendation. So I would also add that one of the recommendations be that going forward, as from next year, there be a scheme to allow for payments by instalments, and that also there be a further look and a further reduction scheme to support those on low income that have difficulty in paying. So I would recommend those 2 points as well, Chair. So those are the recommendations that I would suggest. I don't
Okay.
know if members are happy with that. or
I think
what, but
Rebecca's going to come
Rebecca wants-
into comment. Rebecca?
Thank you, Chair. I was just pondering your comments and actually pondering the comments of Councillor Harris. And in my ward, the issue of Farthinghoe has come up very recently, and it was very much feared that this really much appreciated facility was going to close, which is not the case. It's going to be continued, and in fact, the council is going to be investing some funds, some considerable sums, in improving a facility. And certainly in a very rural ward, in a very mixed ward with areas of deprivation, the concern about the possible loss of a much loved facility like Farthinghoe has raised far more concerns with me and my inbox than the proposals for a green waste charge. And I think residents actually would rather, if it's a selective service like this, which they can opt into, would rather have a small charge. And here if we're talking about harmonizing on cost neutral, we are arguing about a fairly small amount of money per week. They would, in my ward, rather have that charge, which they can opt into, and see the continuation of a facility like Farthinghoe, which, if it was lost because of the range and nature of waste it collects, would have a huge impact on the countryside if it ended up and taking Councillor Meredith's point in our field entrances and laybys. It's a much better use of our resource if we can support facilities like that. And so for that, amongst many reasons, I will support this charge.
Can I thank, Chairman, through you, can I thank Rebecca for her comments? And Farthinghoe has raised a lot of questions. I've had a lot of emails about it as well. And let me be quite specific and quite categoric here. We have no intention whatsoever of closing Farthinghoe on a permanent basis. Yes, it's going to close for a month. That unfortunately has come about because the current operator has decided he wants to retire. He's given notice to finish his contract at the end of January. We have put the tendering process, started the tendering process, but unfortunately it's not going to be complete by the end of January. So the facility is going to have to close until March. We're not going to give a specific date because obviously the new contractor has got to get his team in place, but we expect it to be in the first week or two of March that it will reopen. And Rebecca is quite right. We are using it as an opportunity to look at Farthinghoe and look at how we can improve the layout, etc. So we can make some improvements while it is actually closed. We are the whole household waste recycling contract comes up for renewal in 2025. So the contract that we're letting in respect of Farthinghoe is only up until that date, and we will then include Farthinghoe within the overall contract for West Northamptonshire. And I can give everybody an assurance that we have no intention whatsoever of closing it beyond the few weeks it's going to be closed for the new contract to be implemented.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Phil. Now, Phil's just tabled some recommendations. I think we understand the thread of them, but they're not written down. So does anybody want any clarity? Any members of the Cabinet want any clarity on any of those recommendations or reminder at all? I'm going to propose, therefore, that we take a vote on Phil's recommendations, on the recommendations put forward. Do we agree with those recommendations? Perhaps all those in favour would raise a hand. Any against? Okay, in which case, Phil, we've agreed your recommendations. If you can ensure we've got the correct wording with Paul to reflect the minutes correctly. Thank you. Thank you. Takes us on to item 7. This is Assistive Technology Framework. Matt, this one's with you. In terms of speakers, we then have 2 speakers registered. But if you want to start by introducing the report.
Thank you, Leader. Okay, I'll walk briefly through the report and the accompanying document, if that's okay. So basically, at the moment, the assisted technology service supports around 7,000 people across the whole of Northamptonshire. And for those of you who may not have read the report, assisted technology basically refers to devices or systems that help maintain and improve a person's ability to do the things in everyday life. These can assist with a range of difficulties, including problems with memory and mobility. So I'll just go through a bit of background of the report. The current framework that is being operated at the moment was agreed by NCC for a period of 2 years, and that's set to expire on the 31st of March this year. The current service is hosted by us in the West for the whole of the county, and in line with the blueprint, it will be disaggregated at some point in the future, an appropriate point in the future. So we do need a new framework to continue to help promote Northamptonshire residents' quality of life and independence, support and well-being. And support and independence is a thread that runs all the way through this report, and indeed the strategy that we'll talk about in a little while. We need to make sure that we're compliant with legislation and indeed our own West Northants procurement policy. Also that we're importantly compliant with the Care Act 2014. So the Assisted Technology Service is currently working with a range of partners to develop a new model, which is basically the strategy and the hub concept, which I'll come on to talk about in a moment. The framework will be set at a limit of £999,000. That doesn't mean that the team will spend that money over the period of the 2 years that we're asking for here. The service does generate an income of about £300,000 a year, and last year the spend on equipment was £255,962. So it's critical that we do approve and establish the framework. So just moving on to the strategy. We all know in recent years the impact that the digital revolution is having on our world and how we operate our daily lives. And new assistive technology will play an ever-increasing role in supporting healthy and fulfilling lives. Assistive technology does present health and social care, the whole system, housing and other public bodies, including the voluntary sector, an opportunity to join together around some of the priorities that are being agreed locally, which underpin the NHCP, which is a Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership, and the work around ICANN that has been mentioned a few times here at Cabinet, and we're becoming more familiar, what that means to us as the council and to a system as a health and care system locally. It talks about choosing well, staying well, and living well. The aims of the ICANN programme, alongside the principles of the strength-based conversation model, means that there is a significant opportunity for technology to play a prominent role in achieving the best outcomes possible for the people of West Northamptonshire. And this is also set up against the backdrop of an ageing population in West Northamptonshire that is higher than the national average. And Cabinet heard some stats and figures yesterday when we were talking about the need for housing. They're quite stark when you start and understand them. So the concept that around the strategy involves a hub, working with partners to deliver services through assisted technology, more in a preventative and support way rather than a reactive way. I think different component parts of the health and care system have used assisted technology in an isolated way, I suppose, to respond to a need. But what we're talking about moving forward is working as a whole system with partners to be much more preventative and supportive to indeed enable people to live more independent lives and, that are supportive by the system as and when they need it. The strategy talks about a 3-year plan, which I think is very clear, and I'll come into that in a second. One of the points which I think is very important is to be mindful of is we talk about broadband and some of the areas of the district that haven't necessarily got good coverage, and we've got to make sure that we ensure we do not create any inequalities or digital inequalities within the population. I think that's something that I'm going to keep a very keen eye on as we move forward. We've talked about what is assisted technology. It's currently used under the guise of telecare, which is used extensively, telehealth, robotics, and I was looking through the report. I don't think I've ever come across one of our reports that talks about exoskeletons. Talks about apps, monitoring devices, memory prompts, hearing equipment, and smart devices like many of us probably have at home, like Alexa and the way we can use those for the benefit of our residents and you know, the services as a whole. So the benefits of technology, the main points that technology hopefully will improve the quality of life of people through assistive technology, reduce socialization, reduce social isolation for people, raise awareness by cutting across our partners and including our partners in the system, to reduce look to reduce the need for ambulance calls and A&E visits, support hospital discharges, and to mitigate and lower cost avoidance within the system at the same time, as we talked about, improving outcomes and helping people to be supported and support themselves better. The report mentions that by 2025, we expect 50% of our older population to have some form of technology linked to our central monitoring hub. The Northamptonshire model we're developing will support the delivery of the National Ageing Well programme priorities and deliver the ICANN digital programme using the principles of the strength-based conversation model, which I would recommend, if nobody's come across it, Google the 3 conversations model, because it's been a big way the system has adapted to change to hopefully meet the needs better of our residents. So the key points are around prevention, as we talked about, to prevent crisis management and promote independence, digital and data, obviously to use data that's available in a more intelligent way, to future-proof the system, to make sure that some services do switch over from analog to digital, to make sure we've got the right things in place, to make sure nobody is isolated, work in partnership with the healthcare system and the voluntary sector, and make sure we're understanding the value and impact to meet the challenges of the rising demography and increasing complexity. So one thing we want to do is move from, there's a good diagram on page 41 where it talks about the unknown person and the unknown need, where basically somebody might crop up into the system in a time of crisis. Some decisions are made at the time quite quickly that perhaps might have a long-term effect or disbenefit for that person. So we want to move from that unknown person and the unknown need to knowing the person and supporting their need. So the hope will be able to target specific groups of people with specific questions, remind us to identify the first signs of vulnerability or deterioration, and when information is gathered, it requires further intervention, inform the appropriate teams and partners. So it's all done in a much more joined up way. Page 43, there's a nice diagram that talks about the operation vision, that how it will work in a much more proactive way, making proactive calls, even things like birthday calls to check people are okay and that they're being seen and looked after perhaps by their family, to targeted prevention, making sure people are working and linking with their community. Page 44, it talks about timely response, and I've had various people comment to me about when they're criticising the system, it's often to do with delays in the response, whether it's time and waiting for an ambulance. So, you know, using that hub concept, we can try and keep on top of how somebody's feeling, how they're, you know, what their needs are, making sure they're being looked after. Page 45, there's a nice diagram of a lady called Mavis, but around that, it demonstrates the whole system, how it should be teed up to set up to meet the needs of Mavis, so she can stay at home for as long as possible, be as independent as possible, supported as well as possible, to live at home with the things that she likes, which is the 2 cats as in the picture. So I think there's a very clear 3-year plan on page 46, which talks about the gateways and milestones that need to be achieved over the 3 years. Talks about us from the start endorsing this strategy and getting it endorsed by partners, all the way through to implementing it as business as usual, and then the reviewing and revising points as we go through the 3 years. We've talked about our partners. We'd like to get everybody from the Children's Trust, housing, the hospitals, public health, the university, etc., all engaged in this hub concept. And then as we go through, there's appendices at the back that talk about how the assistive technology service sits in things like the ICANN governance and how it works with a bigger integrated governance around the local healthcare partnership. So finally, I'll just comment that I think the strategy is very clear in its outcomes and objectives. It's very clear on its plan on how it's going to achieve them. It's very clear on how the strategy is positioned to support partners and the local system. And most importantly, it's very clear on how the benefits are going to deliver to our residents. So I'm very happy to present this to Cabinet and commend we accept this, the strategy and the framework point part at the start. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. That was really comprehensive. Very much appreciated. We have 2 speakers registered, the first of which is Councillor Sally Beardsworth, following which is Councillor Stone.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to welcome this report and say hooray at last. As I went to a housing conference in 2010, I looked it up when I went, where people were showing me handsets of people that could contact and speak to about medication, are they well, are they looked after? And we had call care, which was quite good for Northampton Borough Council. But this technology is superb. We need to keep, and I must declare an interest here because I'm over 65, only just, of course. But I will need care. And there will be a time when I won't be able to go out and do what I do now. And I still want to enjoy living in my own home. And I think that's important for a lot of old people. They don't want to go into a nursing home now. They want to be in their own home, in their own community, where people in the community can step up and, you know, sometimes just take the chair out and sit in the front porch and wave to people walking past. You take that away when you take people and put them in a home. You put them in with other people with very little stimulation because other people are in the same situation. So I think it's much better if we can keep people in them. And this technology will allow that to happen and keep people safe. I know myself recently, having broken my arm last year, how long I had to wait for an ambulance to come, you know, and it didn't matter. People made me comfortable on the floor and I was fine. But if you're an old person and you're on your own and you're frightened, you know, if there's just waiting for an ambulance, you've got somebody on an iPad that you can talk to that's by your side to give you reassurance that it's okay, you're all right, you know, we'll look after you, there's somebody coming, but it takes a while. Those sort of things are so important. Also, along with staying in houses, we need also to have somewhere for people to go. We need more recreation for old people. I don't mean table tennis, I mean, you know, going out and actually doing something that will stimulate them, because loneliness for single people is one of the biggest killers there is. Loneliness, it's worse than anything. And you listen to people who talk about COVID, they say, you know, I'm so desperately lonely, I haven't seen anybody, I haven't seen my family. They can't, so we've got to put something in place. This technology will keep people in their homes, but we also must use our facilities, our community centres, the Guildhall, places like that to bring people in so that they can enjoy different things, dare I say a tea dance, but those sort of things keep people active and they enjoy it and they like coming in. And I wish I hadn't used Mavis. It's such an old name. That was something like Samantha or something like that, but never mind, I'll let you off. But no, I'm absolutely thrilled with this. This is the future. This is the future. And I hope that I'll be able to stay in my home as long as possible with the technology that you're providing for people today. So well done.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
comments. So our second and last speaker is Councillor Stone. Danielle, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm actually speaking on behalf of Councillor Emma Roberts because she's got COVID and has had to give her apologies tonight. But like me, she's absolutely delighted with this report because it's got the potential to revolutionise services, hasn't it? And revolutionise the way people who are vulnerable. It's not just old people, is it? People who are vulnerable are going to live their lives. So terribly, terribly exciting. I'm a bit worried about the finances, though. I think we need a bit more explanation of how it's all being costed and whether we've got enough resource for what I've got in my mind, the depth and breadth that this could be going in. So I'm a bit worried about that. I also completely echo Councillor Beardsworth's point, that this isn't a substitute for social interaction. We need to make sure that that happens too. But in terms of people's independence and their social care and their welfare, I think this is, the potential is absolutely enormous, isn't it? It also has occurred to me that while we're looking at this, looking at the complexity and diversity of our communities and how we can weave that in to support the technology would also be extremely exciting. So if you're a Jamaican lady and the voice that's reminding you to take your medication is a Jamaican voice, I think that would be just so exciting, wouldn't it? And, I'm sure as people get older, however fluent they are in English, if it's their sixth language, it may be prompts in their original mother tongue, might be a huge comfort to them. And I think with this kind of technology, we've got the scope to think about that, haven't we? And so I think in the implementation stage, again, it would be a brilliant idea to talk a lot. I'm sure people are already, but talking a lot to the voluntary sector and talking in particular to BAME communities and marginalised communities to see how we can get that extra little bit of magic out of the system for those people as well. But if we could have some reassurances about the finances and just explain a little bit more how that's going to work, would that be all right?
Do you want to add any comments, either Matt or Stuart? Feel free to, or you may want to respond in a more considered way in writing.
I'll let Stuart do the bit about the finances and I'll just pick up on some of the other
Very
bits.
good, very good. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Stone. So in the context of the finances, the report sets out a request to take forward procurement activity to give us a total kind of framework value of 999,000 over the next 2 years. Pardon? Pardon?
I said that's a snip. You could have double.
So that, if I'm honest, is the start to this process, because we host this on behalf of our colleagues in health and our colleagues in the north. This allows both ourselves and those colleagues to call off it. I think what's really positive about this is not just the response that we've seen in relation to the strategy. It is about being on that journey. As we start to enable more and more people to access assistive technology, the business case for further investment in it will become clearer and clearer and clearer. Only this week, there are live examples around how assistive technology can help us deal with some of the pressures within our acute hospitals. Some of this technology now is so advanced that we can create virtual wards within our communities. So people who would normally have to stay in hospital to have some of their baseline observations taken can actually be discharged home and those observations taken within the community. So this gives us a really good opportunity to get this moving. And as we progress and we really start to see the benefits of this, there will be an opportunity for us to present a business case for further investment.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just welcome the support from Danielle and Sally on this. And I think Sally's point around linking this to facilities in the community is a real valid one, and we've got to make sure that happens, because that enables everybody to live better and to be connected and to be a part of their community for as long as possible. And I think, as Stuart's just outlined, there's a lot of possibilities, and they'll keep and continue to develop in line with technology. And I guess that need, and like we all know, COVID has sort of exacerbated and helped push the boundaries of the use of technology. You know, we hold most of our meetings now virtually, or our non-public ones, and everything else that's gone along with it. So I'll just thank colleagues for their support, and happy to recommend, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Adam, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to hone in on recommendation B, just to get a feel from possibly the executive director as to whether that circumvents the usual limits of delegated procurement, and how often he would expect that boundary to be pushed, exceeded. If it's feasible that is going to be exceeded, and it does indeed circumvent the usual limits, then personally I'd feel more comfortable if we inserted, in consultation with the relevant cabinet member, into that recommendation, just to provide a more further democratic safeguard.
Councillor Brown, more than happy to include that within the recommendation.
Thank you. Lizzie, were you going to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that back in the day when I had this portfolio, this was sort of starting to buzz around a little bit, and it was very exciting that time, and really, really pleased to see this paper. And I think, it's going to be life-changing for a lot of people, and will certainly change the way that we operate as well within WNC. So I'm delighted that this has come to fruition.
Thank you. Further comments, questions on this one? No, in which case, as always, the recommendation at section 3, I just ask you to confirm your agreement to the recommendations, please. Is that agreed? Jolly good. Thank you very much indeed. That was indeed our last item. So thank you to all those who attended and participated. Thank you very much. Oh, beg your pardon. I'm just in too much of a rush, aren't I? Yeah. I think Sally, I'm probably ready like you are for a glass of wine. I'm not sure. And that's what it is. Okay, we'll edit that bit out of YouTube. We'll move now on to item 8, which is the Northampton Domestic Abuse Strategy. This one is with David. We're going to hand over to you in a second, David. Then we've got actually 4 speakers registered. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry you forgot us. So you've got the paper in front of you. I'll just go through sort of an intro and go through it anyway. And thanks to the officers for preparing this, and Joe and Vicky have come along this evening. Very much appreciate that. So domestic abuse is any incident or pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive or threatening behaviour, violence or abuse to anyone 16 or over who have been in an intimate relationship, partnership, or of course family members. Sadly, domestic abuse takes many different forms, including physical abuse, emotional, psychological, sexual, and of course financial abuse. It's worth noting the definition of domestic abuse now includes honour-based abuse and forced marriage. I'd also like to highlight that domestic abuse can affect anyone, regardless of gender, sexuality, or ethnic group. So the legislation that's come forward last year, 29th of April last year, the Domestic Abuse Act was given royal assent, and for the first time it places a statutory duty on local authorities to provide support. The aim is to transform the response to domestic abuse to better protect and support their victims, their children, and of course the abusers. The statutory duties on local authorities include setting up domestic abuse local partnership boards, completing a needs assessment to identify gaps in support and develop a strategy for the provision of support in their locality. So where are we now? Well, we've made good progress so far on these new duties. The West Northamptonshire Multi-Agency Domestic Abuse Local Partnership Board has been established under our West Northampton Community Safety Partnership. Early last year, we worked with our colleagues from North Northampton to commission a review of the domestic abuse accommodation support pathway. And along with this, we completed a county-wide being presented to you this evening for adoption. Also, this is an ideal time for Northamptonshire to improve how organisations work together to prevent and respond to domestic abuse. And the new unitary council arrangements offer opportunities for strengthening governance, strategic commissioning, and more joined up working across the historical district and boroughs and county services. The strategy document was being presented to you this evening is a county-wide document, as I've just mentioned with the North. This reflects that many of the key stakeholders and service providers operating in this field do so across the whole of the county. A wide range of partners, including Northamptonshire Police, NHS Clinical Commissioning Group, Northampton Children's Trust, housing providers, and a number of other community and voluntary sector organisations have been involved in the independent review and needs assessment of the development of the strategy. The draft strategy has been presented to the West Northampton CSP and the West Northampton Domestic Abuse Partnership Board. Both groups were supportive of the document. The strategy reflects our commitment to change, to reduce domestic abuse, and to ensure where it takes place, all those affected get the right support and quickly. There's 5 key priorities within this, and that is driving change together, focusing on strengthening our governance and improving the way that partners work together. Early intervention and prevention by promoting better understanding of domestic abuse, providing training to staff, and encouraging staff and volunteers to have a more professional curiosity and to think about the range of services that could be involved in to fully support families. Going on to the provision of services that respond quickly when needed and focus on preventing further abuse of those survivors and families who have or are experiencing abuse or at risk. Minimising harm, making sure services are accessible and meet the needs of everyone in our communities. And going on to the justice, recovery and ongoing protection, reducing impact of domestic abuse and the likelihood of further incidents by pursuing perpetrators through the criminal justice system. It also includes working with the perpetrators on behavioural change. Alongside the strategy, separate action plans will be developed for West Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire to drive the operational delivery of a commitment to reflect specific circumstances in the different localities. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So we have 4 speakers on this item, the first of which is Councillor Danielle Stone. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. This report is such a huge improvement on what went before. I want to thank everybody who's been involved in producing it. It comes as a great relief to me because I couldn't believe how wrong people got the last report, and I'm really, really pleased to see this one. And I've made a few phone calls, so I know that you know, different organisations have been involved in the discussions around this report, and I'm really pleased about that too. I just want there are things in here that I really like. I think the equalities impact assessment is really good. I think the performance framework is really good. One of the big anxieties around it, of course, is going to be finance, because the position we're in isn't good enough. And this report is really open and honest about that. It gives us the facts and the figures about where the gaps are, what the shortcomings are within what is provided at the moment in this really, really important area of work. But there isn't any indication in the report about how we're going to finance what the actual need is, you know. So we need a bit more certainty about that going forward. It also says in the report that some money is being allocated to the organisations. It doesn't tell us how much. And some is being retained for implementation, but it doesn't tell us how much. I think we need to know those things, because we need to know the balance between constructing the service or the integration of the partnerships around the service, and actually how much is being spent on the front line, because it's on the front line where we have really badly fallen. We've fallen down on lots of aspects. But you imagine if you're a frightened woman with lots of children in a terrible situation, if we fail at that point, then that is a massive failing. And we haven't done very well over the last few years, I have to say. I just wanted to take up one issue. You'll have to forgive me, because not everything in the world is good, is it? Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary Fire and Rescue Services say that women and girls are being subject to an epidemic of violence, an epidemic, and that it's deep-rooted and pervasive. So what they're calling for is a radical and a bold shift in how authorities tackle crimes that disproportionately affect women. So, you know, over the last few years, there's been a very noticeable kickback when women like me raise the banner for women who have been oppressed in any way at all, but certainly who are victims of violence in the domestic and non-domestic sphere. There's been a kickback where people are saying, well, you know, it's not just women. And it isn't. It isn't just women, but it predominantly is women. And I think unless we understand the reason for that, we're going to fail in our long-term mission that I think we all share to see the eradication of violence against women and girls. That phenomena is called misogyny. And I think if we don't make reference to that in our work, then we are guilty of misogyny. But I think addressing it needs to be named. And then we need to do a big job of education to help people understand what it is, how it gets constructed, and how it can be dealt with and can be deconstructed. I was really pleased to see in the report mentioned being made of education, but it focuses on schools. Of course, we need schools to take this on. But, you know, I'm not going to make 6-year-olds responsible for what grown-ups do. We need education to be going on within the community or on every level, don't we? Yeah. And we need to consider how we're going to do that. So we create a cultural change where these things no longer happen, where they no longer happen.
We probably need to ask you to wrap up, Tanya. We're a couple of minutes over.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. But you know, I do think that is an omission in the report, but I thank you for the report. I think apart from that, it's really excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. It is, isn't it? Thank you for your positive comments. Our next speaker is Councillor Beardsworth. Sally, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I do welcome the report, but I've done such a lot of work over my time as a councillor on domestic violence, and it always seems strange to me that we leave the perpetrator in the home and we take the victim out of the home with the children and put them in a refuge. What I looked at years ago, the Tasmanian model. And what happens there, there's a working relationship between the judicial, the police, the local authority, the housing departments, and landlords. And what happens if somebody is a victim of abuse, male or female, but generally, as Councillor, I can't remember the name, it's gone. You know, I mean, lady over there. It's because what we should do is take people that do perpetrate crime, and we should put them in not a refuge, but a place where they can be treated and educated on anger management, on drink problems, drug problems that cause a lot of these problems. And it isn't their fault. They've actually brought in a family relationship where the man or the woman has hit the other partner and they think that is the norm. Well, it isn't, and we have to educate them. But if you take the children, you are disruptive, you put in refuge in some part of town, and you then leave the person in the home. Well, what happens to the Tasmanian model is that the judge is then contacted, he puts it so the man cannot revisit the home. We set up a panic room in one of the house, in the house, by putting like a Cytex door on one of the doors, so that if they get into the house, they can't. We change the locks, and if he goes back, he goes into prison. That's this model they did years ago, and it does work. You can't do it in all cases because it sometimes is a family and a cultural thing, but with ordinary it always amazes me. I've visited refuge and I've talked to women there, and they're all in the same boat. You know, they've all been habitually beaten, tragic people. And, you know, it's not them we should be working with, it's the perpetrator. And the perpetrator needs help just as much as anybody else. So although I appreciate the in-depth, and I do believe in education, when the White Ribbon campaign was going on, certain councils got men from all walks of the community and brought them into a room and talked to them about the impact it has on not only just on their family and their children, their extended family, but also on the community, because people don't know how to respond. If somebody next door is being beaten up, do they interfere? Do they call the police? Is it natural, or what do I do? So we really need to look at this in more depth. And I think it's a terrible shame when children are taken away from their school, their home, and put in with a lot of other people that are in a very delicate state of affairs, should be there. And you know, I just wish you'd look at it. If you could look at the Tasmanian model, it doesn't apply to all cases, but it would help a lot. And I think patience is not just that we have to teach children that it's violence is wrong. Today we buried that lovely young teacher in Ireland who lost her life. And those are the things that we've got to stop men doing, is attacking women out and about, people that are strangers. And I mean, she's lost her life 23 years old, and it's just awful. And so we have to make men reach them, and the men with women as well. So it's a plea. I'm pleased the strategy is more in depth. I'm pleased it's better than the last one. I just wish you'd look at that other method, because I feel so sorry for especially the children that get dragged away from their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Our next speaker is Councillor Harris. Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions and comments from me. Firstly, I would echo the overall comment that's been made, which is a welcome of the strategy itself, and it's really good to see this is a positive step forward. A specific question. At the back end of last year, there was the campaign for 16 Days of Action, which was arranged to coincide with the International Day for Prevention of Violence Against Women and Girls. I'd be very interested to know, I know it's not in this report, but it is very closely associated to this report, what we invested in that programme and what outcomes we've determined as a result of that activity. And obviously, if there's any learning from that approach and activity that could be done differently or reapplied for the future. The 40% of repeat cases that's outlined in the report is a truly disturbing figure. And as the report indicates, far higher than the national average. My question is related to that. What following this strategy implementation would be the expected reduction or outturn as a result of the strategy? I may have missed it, but I couldn't see any specific target or specific reduction quantified in there. That would be useful to know. Similarly, the comment about the provision of refuge, higher than average in Northamptonshire. And again, is there a particular target or specific outcome we would expect to see as a result of the implementation of this strategy? Final points, really. I echo completely the comments made by Councillor Stone. This should be very clearly a strategy for prevention. The issues we have in society these days are deep-rooted. And, you know, the word that we've heard tonight, again, and many times, is this notion of epidemic. So I'm interested to know what other programmes or initiatives might this council work towards. Prevention and awareness, as we've heard from both the previous speakers, are very important in this whole process. And of course, this begins at home. But there is a role for the wider society to play, including schools and councils, but also society in general. I can't not take this opportunity to remind the council that violence against women does not just exist in domestic settings. and it is still proportionately committed by men and boys. This council failed to support the White Ribbon campaign in September, which would have entirely complemented this strategy and not detract from it. And I will continue to raise its merits at any opportunity that I can find. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Our final speaker then is Councillor Meredith. Dennis, over to you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity of speaking. This strategy, which I've been reading, I've studied it in depth, and I'd like to thank the authors of this strategy because there's lots of things in it which are really, really good, and I appreciate what's in it. I don't know if anybody knows, perhaps some of you wouldn't know, if a child lives with a family where there's domestic abuse, if the father is beating the mother up and the children see it, I don't know if you know if that has a lasting effect right up until the child and grows into adult. Some of you might have seen the program on the television with the footballer. I can't remember his name now. He suffered the same thing, and he suffers the same as I did when I was a kid. So I'm really speaking from my heart here because I know all about it. I also think we don't do enough to support this. I think as a council, we need to have a day's debate on this with all the members of the council, because this is an extremely important issue. I attended the march to win back our streets, and it was packed by all the women who were worried about their future and worried about the abuse if they go out of a night and walk through the town, and they're worried about abuse. And that was a great turnout. And I was very encouraged by the number of people who took part in that demonstration. How do we go about it? What should be in this? I've had two cases recently. One was a lady who suffered a broken jaw by the man who smashed her jaw and it was broken. And one is by a woman who was bullied by her husband and wouldn't let her take part in any activities. But there's nowhere for these people to go. We've only got one shelter for women, and I don't think it's enough. I think there should be a proper shelter, fully funded by the council, which is run and with experts, counsellors, to give the counsellor counselling and to look after the women that have been abused, and especially for the children. I think we should take this subject more seriously, and if I believe we should have, as I said before, we should have a away day to educate all councillors of how this is so important issue. And I thank you for listening to me. I am speaking here, as I say, from my heart, because I know how I was affected as a child, and I put it to you. Thank you.
Mike, did you want to make a comment particularly to Dennis?
Yeah, just a very quick comment. I take the suggestion about having a debate or more time on this. We've actually got the kind of the member day coming up. It's in February. It was supposed to be in January, but we've had to move it to February. So I don't see why this couldn't be a topic that we could potentially cover at that as well.
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah. Thank you, Dennis.
I think that would be a brilliant suggestion. If that would be a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. I see Stuart's made a note, and yeah, that's one we'll work out. Okay. Any further comments at all or questions on this? David, any further comments you'd like to make?
I think, thank you all councillors who've spoken this evening. I think Councillor Meredith, I think we can sort of square this off in saying one thing. you say take us to take this seriously. We really do take this seriously. This is a starting point. Everybody's input this evening and moving forward would be massively appreciated. We've got a very good team, 3 of which are here tonight. So be rest assured that we are looking at this. You know, it's you talk of it touching you as an individual. Sadly, I've as a family, we've had domestic abuse affect us quite recently. Yeah, there's real drive anyway, but when it touches you, then it's even, you know, it's raw, and you really do appreciate the challenges. Looking at the various points that have been brought up, I do need to say that Councillor Roberts did send a correspondence in quite late this evening, and we will be responding to that. I don't profess to be an expert, but leaving a perpetrator in a house at 7 o'clock in the evening and moving children is probably the safest thing to do from a safeguarding perspective. I'm sure Stuart Lackaby can talk in great detail on the reasoning and thinking behind that. Also on the finance, and this is, you know, this is a big subject, and it's as I say, a starting point, but your involvement, assistance and ideas will be greatly received from all speakers and all councillors. I don't know if Stuart would like to step in.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Thank you all members for your really helpful comments and kind of queries as we work through this. I've tried to kind of scribble down people's questions as we went through this, so hopefully I'll be able to address them. But if not, I really welcome the opportunity at a member away day to get into a decent level of debate in and amongst this. I suppose the first thing from a finance perspective, the first thing that we needed to do was to shore up our existing provision to ensure that we didn't have less services going forward than we had previously. The strategy talks on a number of places about this being a kind of first step for us in relation to a journey we're on in not just eradicating domestic abuse in all of its forms from our communities, but a starting point around fundamentally understanding how it affects our local residents, whether they are men, women, children. Our absolute expectation, not just an aspiration, has to be around that eradication of it within our communities. So that starting point will be absolutely structured around understanding domestic abuse in data terms. Do we fundamentally understand not just who our victims are, but what's the prevalence within same-sex couples and families? We don't have that level of detail based on how things have worked previously. Ultimately, what will come off the back of that data is a commissioning strategy and an action plan, which will mean in 12 months, 2 years' time, we'll be able to put our hand up and say, we really understand what domestic abuse looks like locally within our communities, and we have an array of services which are absolutely orientated around that understanding. The Tasmanian model sounds really interesting, and I'm more than happy for us to kind of have a look at that. I suppose the challenge with that kind of model around the perpetrator being removed is usually that the victims of domestic abuse and their children tend to flee before prosecution has happened. So in effect, it's kind of last resort that an individual would flee the family home. So the ability to kind of at that point, it's getting them earlier. And as such, that kind of leads into that conversation about prevention. If you look at our investment from a domestic abuse perspective at the moment, so after the event, we have not just one, but we have a number of refuges across the patch. When we look at our spend, do we spend enough money, for example, on perpetrator programs? Up and down the country, there are really effective perpetrator programs which are designed to significantly reduce the reoffending that we have in and around domestic abuse. So we have to have that expectation that as we move forward, we can't simply, whilst it's absolutely paramount, focus on support to victims. because that doesn't deal with this within our communities. So the approach that we need to take forward, kind of linking into the prevention side of things, is about starting early, about working with our young people around identifying those red flags that allow them to identify as an individual, whether their temper is getting the better of them and they're heading towards potentially being an abuser, whether it's working with potential future victims around identifying whether they're in a situation where actually there is a real risk of them being subject to domestic abuse. So as we move forward with this, that notion of being able to engage members in that wider debate will be able to give members a real level of confidence that we've got a grip of this locally. We don't profess to be experts, and as such, that opportunity to engage far and wide on this is really well received. I do want to thank the kind of team for pulling this together, because I think it's a really good strategy, and I appreciate the comments that we've had today. Thank you.
Excellent, Stuart. Thank you so much. That was an excellent summary. And I think a key part of this is to better understand, better anticipate, better prevent, isn't it? Not just deal with the acute problem when it arrives, but prevent. I think that might be the last comment. Does anybody have any further comment at all on that? If not, may I just direct your attention to the recommendations and ask you, thanking the team for all the work they've done. This is an excellent document. Can I ask you to confirm your support for those recommendations? Is that agreed? Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. After the false start a moment ago, I can now confirm that was our last item. Thank you, everybody, for your